Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I am going to be talking about Pete Davidson and Dungeons and Dragons. All right. Now, the reason why is I think Pete Davidson is the strongest human analogy for what Dungeons and Dragons is today, without exception. Okay. So let's talk it through. So let's talk it through. Here's why we're talking about Pete Davidson today and why he is so important to understanding Dungeons and Dragons. So first of all, on Saturday, November 10th, 2018, I think Pete Davidson chose who the next United States president will be. What? I can hear you already saying, what? How did Pete Davidson choose the next United States president, right? And also, what's that got to do with the priceless crossbows in Faerun? What's that got to do with Dungeons & Dragons? Well, it does have to do with Dungeons & Dragons, and I'll explain it all before we're finished. But let's start talking about it. All right. So how did Pete Davidson choose who the next president is going to be? In my opinion, Pete Davidson on Saturday, November 10th, 2018, chose who the next United States president will be, and that is Dan Crenshaw. All right. So Dan Crenshaw is an American Navy veteran. He's a Republican. He's a Texas Republican congressman. In 2012, Dan Crenshaw lost his right eye to an IED, and that happened in Afghanistan. Get this: after Dan Crenshaw lost his eye in Afghanistan in an IED, to an IED, he was then deployed to Bahrain and South Korea. He's deployed after he lost his eye. I'm like, what? That's amazing, right? Yeah, it's truly incredible. All right, his service as a Navy SEAL is incredibly important, right? All right, so here's the issue overall. We're seeing a situation where Pete Davidson, so 1 week before Saturday, November 10th, 2018, Pete Davidson did a skit on Weekly Update within Saturday Night Live, and in that skit, Pete Davidson insulted no less than 4 Republican midterm candidates and just lambasted them based on how they look, right? He made fun of their physical representations. Now, at the macro level, just insulting Republicans overall based on how they look, completely fair game. Overall, Pete Davidson is a professional comedian on Saturday Night Live. You go to Saturday Night Live for irreverent humor. They're known for irreverent humor, right? So Pete Davidson insulted a bunch of nondescript Republicans, right? But then he insulted Dan Crenshaw, and he specifically insulted his eye, which he had lost, right? And then he did his normal, quippy little, oh, it's okay, I'm making fun of everybody, kind of, typical comedian defense, right? Well, the moment that Pete Davidson got done insulting a Navy SEAL veteran, right, who had lost his eye in Afghanistan, serving the country, defending everybody's freedom, immediately Twitter just lit up, and there was incredible outrage at Pete Davidson's joke. Okay. So what happened then was, for 1 week, there was a huge outpouring of anger toward Pete Davidson. What was surprising, okay, was the anger was not just coming from the right. It was not just coming from Republicans, but even Democrats said, too far, the line, you have crossed the line of comedy, right? Pete Davidson is known for pushing the line. Almost all SNL comedians are going to push the line on what can be done with comedy. It's part of being a professional comedian is, putting your toe over the line and then pulling it back. It's part of what they do, right? Well, the reality is Pete Davidson learned real quick that he had gone over the line, and you absolutely cannot make fun of a Republican Navy SEAL veteran who lost his eye in Afghanistan from an IED, right? You can't do it, clearly, right? So Pete Davidson's now in a lot of hot water, right? Well, here's the part where I think Pete Davidson chose who the next United States president will be, which is Dan Crenshaw, and it's going to happen whether he chooses to run against, in my opinion, against Trump in 2020 or to be the new Republican candidate in 2024. Okay, so here's what happens, right? This is truly amazing, right? So on 1 week after he insulted Dan Crenshaw, Pete Davidson goes on SNL, goes right on to the Weekly Update. Colin Jost is sitting right next to him, and he says, "Hey, guess what, Colin? This week, both Democrats and Republicans were able to agree on one thing, right? That I'm a jerk, right? Well, he didn't use the word jerk, right? And he says, and I found out that, and so there could be reconciliation between, so there absolutely can be agreement between Democrats and Republicans. They all agree that I'm a jerk, right? And so then he said, I apologize to Dan Crenshaw, and I want it to be known that it was a poor choice of words. I apologize. Then Dan Crenshaw slides over in the chair, which if you watch SNL, that happens all the time, and he is there in person, right? So Dan Crenshaw, this Texas Republican congressman who nobody knew before this, right? I didn't know this guy's name from Jack, right? But before this event, before this all happened with Pete Davidson, I think maybe 1 in 100 people knew who Dan Crenshaw was, right? Now I think about 40 out of 100 people know who Dan Crenshaw is, right? And guess what? You just got to bump that number up 11 more %, and you just won the presidency, right? So, and trust me, that's what's going to happen, right? I'm predicting it now. I think Dan Crenshaw, based on the actions of Pete Davidson, is going to be our next U.S. president, okay? We'll get all the way there. I'm going to explain how that's going to happen, all right? Okay. So Dan Crenshaw says, "Hey, Pete," right? And he says, "You know what, Pete? I accept your apology," right? And then they have a little bit of back and forth. And Dan Crenshaw says, "See, we as Republicans and Democrats can have reconciliation." Boom, done, right? And he also said Dan Crenshaw said to Pete Davidson, "Thanks for making a Republican look good on SNL." And Pete Davidson's like, "You got to stop saying that. You've been saying that all day." And that is incredible. Seeing Saturday Night Live make a Republican look good, you know the world's been flipped upside down when that's happening, right? So how did Pete Davidson choose who the next president is going to be, in my opinion, right? Here's how he did it, right? So one, I have a strong belief right now, based on what's happened with our current president and based on a trend that's been happening since the 80s, I believe that going forward, absolutely no politician will be able to be elected president, okay? Only celebrities will be able to be elected president. Before Pete Davidson did what he did, Dan Crenshaw was a politician. He was incapable of winning the presidency. Pete Davidson just handed Dan Crenshaw celebrity. That's the magic sauce. That's what you need to get elected to be president going forward. Because America is not going to listen to politicians anymore when they've seen celebrities run for president. It's too exciting for the American people, and it's way too exciting for the press, right? So I think it's going to be impossible for politicians to be elected as president, right, going forward. Only celebrities will be able to be elected as president going forward. So now Dan Crenshaw is a Navy SEAL, a veteran, a politician, and a celebrity, right? And the celebrity part was handed to him on a silver platter by Pete Davidson, right? Right? Which I find hysterical. I think that is incredibly funny. What's this got to do with Dungeons and Dragons? All right. Well, Pete Davidson is the human analogy for Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, by most people think, is a silly little game, right? Sit in your basement, play with elf figures and dragon figures. I'm saying different. Here's what Dungeons and Dragons actually is, okay? So now we know, okay, before last week, everybody thought that Pete Davidson was a comedian who wore nice sneakers and dated Ariana Grande, right? No one thought he was a man of significance, right? But the reality is everybody was wrong. Pete Davidson is a man of significance. He just chose the next president, in my opinion, right? He handed celebrity, massive celebrity, to a politician, right? And I don't think it's going to be a flash in the pan. I think it's going to stick, right? So here's what's going on, right? The reality is, if you look at Pete Davidson, he looks insignificant, right? But the reality is, right now, right today, as of today, right? Pete Davidson has political, social, and cultural impact, right? Just like Dungeons and Dragons. Everybody thinks Dungeons and Dragons is a silly little game. It's not. It has political, cultural, and social impact, right? Now, how does Dungeons and Dragons have political, cultural, and social impact? Here's how, okay? One, it is, and this is very important to understand. So it is an element of Americana. Dungeons and Dragons is Americana. It was born here in America in 1974, and then it was made into a global product and it was pushed to the world, okay? And the reality is, the smartest, some of the most important people in the world are playing Dungeons and Dragons right now. And the reason why is, in order to be a dungeon master, you need intelligence, creativity, artistry, and confidence. If you have intelligence, creativity, artistry, and confidence, you can do anything. Dungeon masters are the most valuable resource in the world. If you have intelligence, creativity, artistry, and confidence, there's really absolutely no limit to what you're capable of. And the reality is, I think right now, good dungeon masters, if you take that subset, you are looking at some of the most capable, high potential men and women on the planet. And this is not understood today. It is the best filter for finding people who are capable of accomplishing anything, right? Because right now, any company in the world would want an intelligent, creative, artistic person with confidence. Every company in the world is looking for that right now. And guess what, right? Good dungeon masters is the perfect filter for this. And those people who are playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? You're going to find them writing blockbuster films that are going out to the entire world, taking an American message to the globe. You're going to find them in CEO positions. You're going to find them in, all the big industries, pharma, tech, energy. And the reality is, right now, Dungeons & Dragons is exactly like Marvel was in the 80s. It is a minor intellectual property that less than 1 in 100 people understand the true value of. It is a multi-billion-dollar IP that is massively undervalued, because the people who are playing it and who are excited by it are the people who have some of the most potential on the planet. Right? And so, just like Pete Davidson, if you look at Pete Davidson, he's a comedian who wears nice sneakers and used to date Ariana Grande, right? You can be dismissive of him. But Pete Davidson very well may have just picked the next president of the United States of America, okay, by handing him celebrity. His political, cultural, and social impact was not understood and was not acknowledged, right, until Pete Davidson did something to make everybody notice. And I think that moment is coming for Dungeons and Dragons. I think there's going to become a point where people are going to realize, just like the value of Marvel was realized, and Marvel is now understood to be a multi-billion-dollar property, literally hundreds of billions, right? Where, the reality is, I think Dungeons and Dragons is just like baseball and jazz and comic books and Coca-Cola. It is Americana, and its impact on the world has not been fully seen. And there's going to be a moment where people's, head snaps up and go, what? Dungeons and Dragons? Oh my gosh. I didn't realize that intelligent, creative, artistic, confident people are playing it by the millions. The low millions, but are playing it by the millions. Dungeons & Dragons is a filter for millions of intelligent, creative, artistic, confident people. And that is incredibly valuable. Nobody understands the power of it. Nobody understands the value of it the way it should be understood at the macro level. That's how Dungeons & Dragons is exactly like Pete Davidson. That's how Pete Davidson is exactly like Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons' moment has come. Pete Davidson's moment happened last week. He may have some additional moments. We'll see. But I'm telling you, in my opinion, Pete Davidson just chose the next president of the United States of America. And who on earth would have thought that a comedian who wore nice sneakers and used to date Ariana Grande would be picking the next president of the United States of America? Well, get this. I think everybody is going to be surprised what comes out of Dungeons & Dragons. I think we haven't even remotely seen the potential that exists within that game and the value that exists within that intellectual property. That's my thought. I would love to hear your thought. Please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you very much.